Om Tat Sat. My humble prostrations to the all-pervading Brahman, to my worshipful Guru, Swami Jyotirmayananda Maharaj, to all the sages and saints of this world, and to you divine souls watching this satsang. Today we will be studying Sutra number 4 of the Samadhi Pad from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, a very well respected scripture in the Sanatana Dharma. So Sutra number 4 is Vritti Sarupyam Itaratra. Again, Vritti Sarupyam Itaratra. Vritti, as we have discussed before, is a thought wave. Not a sound wave, but a thought wave. The thought that creates its wave and it keeps coming inside at a very high speed. But that vritti that has created that thought wave, that is called the vritti. And sarupyam is identification, where we start to identify with that thought wave. And itaratra means at other times. So at other times, the seer is identified with the thought waves. So first they said somebody who has cleansed the mirror. In Sutra number 3 we had studied. Somebody who has cleansed the chitta is able to see the self. But how do you do that? It's a long process. That's called sadhana, spiritual discipline. Waking up early in the morning, contemplating, purifying our bodies and so on. But here it says at other times when the seer is related to the thought waves. And he who has not succeeded in controlling the mental modifications, which are called vrittis, continues to be identified with the moods of the mind. And how do the moods of the mind work? They work by the 3 gunas. They are called the 3 modes of nature, and they are very important. And as you know, they are sattva. Sattva is when you are in a state of purity or in a state of bliss, spiritual advancement, so on. When you're feeling happy, peaceful, that is sattva. And rajas is action oriented, when you are driving, when you're talking, when you're walking, when you're thinking of the business deals. All that is rajas or action. And tamas is inertia. So when you are dull, or when you're tired, or when you're sleeping, or when we are procrastinating, these are different forms of tamas. So these 3 gunas, they constantly operate. They are part of nature and they operate in every one of us, everywhere. But so the goal is to increase our purity or sattva to a point where the mind becomes calm and peaceful. When it's in rajas, when your mind is restless, you should be able to say, I am in rajas right now. So you can identify which mode of nature is operating. When you're peaceful, you're in sattva. When you are not so peaceful, when you're action oriented or distracted, you're in rajas. And when you are feeling dull and passive, then you are in tamas. But a yogi who is established in the self is no longer identified with these moods, and this is where the secret lies, to learn how to control these moods. And therefore in Bhagavad Gita they call him a gunatita, somebody who has transcended the 3 gunas. He has transcended tamas, rajas and even sattva, and now he is in a 4th state called the turiya, which is a transcendental state. So the vrittis or thought waves that arise during sattva are called shanta or peaceful. That's why they are called shanta vrittis. And during rajas they are called ghora. Ghora means agitated. So now we feel, this is why we snap back, we are angry, or we things don't happen according to what we are expecting, we are restless. Know that that is rajas. And during tamas we are in a mood state or dull state. And so let us get into the 5 states of the chitta. And this is a very important sutra, because it's one of the fundamentals for you to understand how your mind operates and how these vrittis function based on the three gunas, and if you're able to identify them, just like anything, knowledge is power. So therefore you're able to control all the things that are happening inside of you which are not visible to us. Mudha, so there are 5 states of the chitta. We will discuss each one. Mudha means dull. That's the state. When tamas is rising, there is tendency towards all that is sinful, gross, negative in life. So know when those vrittis are coming up and we feel like doing those things, or we do them so many times, it is tamas that has made us do those things. It manifests in sleep, drowsiness, laziness, inertia, and that eventually sometimes drags us into depression and so on. So we know how much stress there is, and a lot of times tamas is a big contributing factor towards that. So when that is happening, know that you are in a state of mudha. Mudha means dull. The second one is kshipta. Kshipt means distracted. So when we are distracted or in a fickle-minded state, it is inclined to virtue and vice, good and evil. But it's in a distracted structure. It could be good or bad, but it depends on how distracted your mind is. So when you're thinking of a business venture and now you're working very hard to accomplish that, that's a positive thing from a material perspective. But if a person is going on the destructive side, he could be doing the converse of that and destroying himself also. So that is called kshipta. The third state is called vikshipta. That is partially distracted. Not fully. In kshipt it's very distracted, very visibly distracted, but in vikshipt it's partially distracted, which means a person of this state is increasingly inclined to virtue. So generally this applies to most of the civilized society, most people who are generally good and they behave very nicely and they follow the ethical laws and they follow the laws of the land also, everything. However, in the presence of obstacles and temptations, they slip back to the lower states of mind. Or when agitated, somebody makes them very angry and then they blurt out. So doesn't happen all the time, but there are certain times where it can happen. That is called vikshipta state. And the fourth state is called ekagrata. That is called the one-pointedness of that state. And that's a wonderful state that belongs to yogis, people who have been meditating for a long time and therefore they are able to keep their thought one-pointed. So this practice of meditation and samadhi is meant to bring about this state, concentration. It's called dharana, bringing the mind again and again to that one-pointed concentration. And when the state is perfected, when somebody gets good at it, a yogi, he attains intuitional knowledge. And that is amazing. That is not something you can learn through just reading the scriptures or studying. You have to get that through your tapasya, which is called your penance, your practice. And that comes through the divine grace, because these are subtle laws of nature that you are trying to decode, comprehend. And sage Patanjali so gracefully and our Guru Jyotirmayananda ji have so beautifully explained it for us in simple terms so each of us can enjoy this nectar. But when that happens, when that state is perfected, it is called vivek khyati, which means now it's not going to go back. Normally, see, we go up and then we slip back and so on. But once you have reached a certain plateau, now you're only going to move forward, which means you have, through your practice, been able to concentrate so well that now your mind is well under your control. So that is called Vivek Khyati, and that reveals the difference between the Chitta and the Purusha. So that takes you away from the transience of the world process and takes you into a totally different spiritual dimension, which is called the God dimension. You're able to connect to that God particle that is right within your own consciousness, and that is called the Ekagrata state. And finally, the fifth one is called Niruddha. Niruddha is called the controlled or the purified state. A yogi, having discovered himself in the spirit, is no longer dependent upon the chitta and its functions, which means, see, the chitta includes your unconscious, subconscious, and unconscious, semi-conscious, all that, all the vrittis, all the thought waves, the storehouse of the thought waves is called the chitta. So he's no longer dependent upon them because he has totally purified his chitta. So therefore the vrittis become helpless, they become pure and clean, and he has mastered it. He then enters into asampragyat samadhi, which is the highest samadhi, and there time and space don't exist. He's been able to transcend them through his constant effort and meditation. So the first three states, which we call the Muda, Kshipta and Vikshipta, which we just discussed, belong to the worldly minded people. Most people living in this world are in these three states. Either they are in the dull state, or the very distracted state, or the partially distracted state. And the last two states that we talk about, Ekagrata and Niruddha, belong to yogis. Yogis are people who want to connect with God. Remember, yoga, we discussed this. Yoga is to try to connect with your consciousness to the higher dimension of God consciousness. So when you do that, you are basically a yogi and a serious spiritual aspirant. We can also call them sadhaks in Sanatana Dharma. So when we are pursuing that path, Ekagrata, which is concentration, and then finally purifying it, those are the last two. And then he no longer identifies with the vrittis of the mind. So just like when the vrittis come in your dream, you see so many dreams, so many different things, but when you wake up, that dream is totally non-existent, it's gone, and you don't give it any value. Much in the same way, a yogi who has acquired the two states of Ekagrata and Niruddha is no longer impacted by the world. So the world also becomes like a dream for him because the vrittis are no longer operational in him. These vrittis are further explained in the next sutra, which we will cover. That is sutra number 5. We will cover that tomorrow. Om Tat Sat.